the classic mistakes that the newbie writers make in comics, in terms of the actual storytelling, is trying to cram too much into like a sequence of events into a single panel. Like I was saying before about distilling it down into like what is the single most telling visual moment. Obviously, it's a visual medium. You need to tell you show, don't tell, is by far the most important thing. Don't have people explain stuff to each other. You show it happening, make it a moment. But time within the panel is a very weird and fluid thing. You'll naturally assume that a single panel is going to be a single instant of time. But of course, if two people talking to each other, then that panel takes as long as it takes for them to say those lines. It drives me crazy when the time represented by the visual action in the panel is completely at odds with the amount of dialogue. Yeah. Like, for example, in like the 1980s X-Men comics or something like this, you'll have Wolverine flying through the air about to stab somebody with his claws whilst delivering a 5-minute monologue. And then the next panel he lands the blow, and there's another 5-minute monologue, and that drives me crazy. I think you need to learn to control the flow of time, not just between panels and across panels, but within an individual panel. Weirdly, time still flows within a single panel, and it does it from left to right. It's kind of counterintuitive, but if you think about it, if we've got a panel of, Jock says something and I reply to it, his line of dialogue is going to be on the left-hand side of the page, left-hand side of the individual panel, but that happens before my reply. So if you think about it, like even within a single panel, time is traveling, it's moving across from left to right. And you need to learn to control that kind of stuff. A common newbie mistake, with artists especially, is to position the characters wrongly on the page. Ideally, you want to have the first speaker on the left of the panel. But if you've got like a group of characters all talking to each other, and they're not going to be talking in the same sequence in every panel, it's going to be quite difficult to juggle. It's a mistake I sometimes make myself, in that it's difficult. You can mislead the artist. It'd be difficult for the artist to manage to put all the dialogue in there and have the speakers in the correct part of the panel without all the balloon tails crossing and this kind of thing.
I've got a quite good example of that actually. I share a studio with Lee Garbutt, who draws for DC, and he was recently working on a Grant Morrison Batman story. Now obviously Grant's an amazingly talented writer, but Lee was having trouble with his one panel because there was 3 characters, 2 of which were speaking to each other, and then at the end Robin jumps in from stage left or whatever, and Lee was like, well, this is more than one event. It's how can I show this? And we solved it by, which is the obvious thing when you're aware of this phenomena within comics, was a long panel, and the character spoke first, and Robin jumps in from the right hand side. Now, that doesn't sound a particularly clever way to solve it, but again, like with what Andy's saying is the time has passed. So in fact, you have managed to encapsulate 10 seconds, 15 seconds of story in a situation within a single panel.
The time within the panel, obviously, okay, as I said, moves from left to right. There's different ways of controlling how long it seems to take. I was talking about the example of, like you've got somebody flying through the air but delivering a large amount of dialogue. Obviously, you can't write a panel description that says, Judge Dredd kicks the door in, shoots the perps, and then reloads his gun in one panel. But you'll be surprised, but people write that all the time. Newbie guys are always doing that. If it's a sequence, you have to break it into a sequence. There's sometimes you can find some kind of visual shorthand trick to suggest, what's just happened and what's about to happen within a single panel. But that's part of the brevity thing I'm talking about. The amount of, this is an artist thing, but the amount of visual detail in a panel controls how long your eye tends to linger on it. Who's read Hard Boiled by Frank Miller and Jeff Darrow? Those of you who haven't, it's this crazy science fiction action comic, large format. Jeff Darrow does incredibly detailed artwork, and basically it's just a fight scene. It's basically a 48-page fight scene. But the artwork, each panel is a whole page, and the art is so unbelievably detailed. And it's a moment-by-moment, action-by-action fight scene. That basically you can literally spend 5 minutes looking at each panel, because it's like a Where's Wally picture. He's drawn every individual shell casing flying out of this, a gun and with a giant cityscape, and all full of detail. And it has this incredible, weird effect on the perceived passage of time. It feels like watching like a Sam Peckinpah type slow-motion action sequence. Even though each panel seems to last a split second in terms of what's actually happening. And like Frank Miller controls that with the dialogue as well. It might be a single word of dialogue is all the guy's got a chance to say. But the amount of visual detail in the artwork makes you slow down whilst reading it. You could whip through it, but it slows you down. And so it creates this weird effect of you're watching something happen in ultra slow motion, bullet time kind of thing. At the other extreme, if you want to suggest very fast action, you do the opposite. You drop out the background detail. Something I remember, the first time I ever noticed that was Kevin O'Neill in Nemesis the Warlock. There was a fight scene. He does these incredible, lush, weird, surreal visual landscapes. But during a fight scene between a good guy and a bad guy, he just dropped out the background detail completely. It was just white space while they're having a sword fight. And it makes the fight scene go bam, 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 flick past it, as fast as you can and read it. So that's a useful way of controlling the perceived passage of time. And obviously using dialogue. In comics, space is time. Okay? A large panel will seem to last longer than a short panel. Don't ask me why, but that's how it seems to work. And obviously, if you're controlling the amount of the passage of time with dialogue, if you've got a very large amount of dialogue in a single panel, that takes a long time to read, but it takes up more space on the page. So if you want to, and you need to be aware that there's very, very harsh physical limitations on exactly how much you can fit in there. Not just in terms of how much room there is for the artwork, but how much room there is for the dialogue. And that's another reason why I always say less is more. You absolutely have to boil it down to what is essential in the story. What Scott McCloud calls closure is an interesting technique. Hands up who's read Understanding Comics. I don't know how much I'm preaching to the choir. Most of you have, or half of you have. That's good. I don't know, I think Scott McCloud coined the term closure in this context. But it's a weird effect caused by the brain. What's the best way to get this? Okay, basically when you put two images next to each other, as in comics panels, the brain automatically, you assume a connection of meaning between them. The brain just does that automatically. The Russian film director Sergei Eisenstein, the director of Battleship Potemkin, did some experiments with film editing back around the time of the First World War. Trying to find new ways of creating meaning in film. And he did a little experiment by showing an audience a short film. It would be a close-up of a man's face, and then it would cut to a bowl of soup. And he asked the audience, what's this guy feeling? And they said, well, he feels hungry. He showed a completely different audience, the same guy's face, and then it cut to a grave or a coffin, I can't remember which. And I asked them, the audience, how does this guy feel? And oh, he's sad, he's in mourning. And it's the same piece of footage of the guy, but by cutting to a different image, the brain assumes a connection of meaning between them, and so we impose a supposed meaning on the image. Now the same thing happens in comics. When you put two panels next to each other, you can have fun just drawing around the panels and then shuffling them up and putting them next to each other and seeing what effects you can create that way. But the brain assumes a connection of meaning, and Scott McCloud calls this closure. He uses the example in Understanding Comics of a guy raising an axe. And then the next panel is a cityscape with a scream going across, and you assume the guy's landed the axe blow and killed this person and they're screaming. But the fact is you don't know that, you assume that connection of meaning. But that second panel could be a city on the other side of the world. It could be 10,000 years ago. You don't know. But that's the essential technique of how comics work at the fundamental level. That's what sequential art means. Sequential. You put them next to each other and you create that association of meaning between the two panels. And once you learn to control that's the key that unlocks comic storytelling. Once you learn to control that, you can create whatever kind of effect you want. The connection of meaning happens in the gutter. The gut's what you call the space between the panels. That space is where the magic happens, because that's where you put your own meaning into that empty space. You fill in that gap yourself, and that's what comic storytelling is.